November 1943, Betio Island. Marines are pinned by enemy fire, clinging to shattered reef while their most terrifying weapon fails them. The official story of the M2 Flamethrower is one of battlefield dominance, but its birth came from deadly catastrophe. Electrical spark igniters shorted out, leaving entire squads trapped and exposed. What emergency forced engineers to gamble everything on a radical redesign? The answer shaped the fate of the Pacific War. Marines hit the water before dawn, rifles held high, packs slipping from their shoulders as they waded toward Betio's black sand. Machine guns opened up from hidden pillboxes, the flat coral reef offering no cover. Men dropped behind shell craters, some forced to crawl forward, others pinned in place by intersecting arcs of fire. The plan called for flamethrower teams to lead the assault on Japanese bunkers, but the weapons sputtered and died in the salt air. Operators yanked at ignition triggers, sweat mixing with seawater, but the battery-powered spark failed again and again. With each misfire, the men inched closer to the enemy, exposed and desperate. Grenades bounced off concrete, rifle fire ricocheted harmlessly. The smell of cordite and burning palm fronds drifted over the reef, but the bunkers held fast. Marines watched comrades fall, unable to reach the defenders, hidden inside reinforced positions. Every minute lost meant more lives spent, the momentum of the landing bleeding away against obstacles that refused to burn. In the chaos, the promise of firepower became a liability. Squads found themselves trapped, their most feared weapon now a dead weight. The urgency for something better grew with every casualty, every failed attack on the fortified line. On Betio's beaches, the need for a reliable answer became impossible to ignore. Inside the Army's ordnance labs, engineers pored over battered flamethrowers sent back from the Pacific. Corroded battery terminals, swollen from salt and moisture, told the story before a single test. Circuits shorted out under even mild humidity, and when technicians simulated island conditions, the spark ignition failed almost every time. Field reports piled up, with operators describing weapons that sputtered, refused to fire, or simply died in their hands when the pressure was highest. Attempts to shield the batteries or waterproof the connections made little difference. The Pacific climate overwhelmed every fix. The data painted a clear picture. The battery-powered system was not just flawed, it was fundamentally unsuited for war in the tropics. Each breakdown left assault teams exposed, forced them to improvise under fire, and cost lives that could not be replaced. Engineers tracked failure rates across dozens of units, confirming the pattern. In internal memos, senior ordnance officers described the problem as unsalvageable. No amount of field repair or incremental improvement could guarantee ignition when it mattered most. The urgency was impossible to ignore. With every failed assault and every after-action report, pressure mounted for a solution that would work reliably in the worst conditions. The decision came down in 1943. The team chose to scrap the battery ignition entirely. They would start from scratch, searching for an answer that could withstand jungle heat, salt spray, and the chaos of battle. The lives of frontline troops depended on it. A new idea took shape on the workbenches at the ordnance labs. Instead of relying on fragile wires and corroding batteries, engineers built a mechanical solution that will work in any weather. At the heart of the redesign sat a small, revolver-style magazine fitted to the end of the flame gun. Each chamber held a pyrotechnic cartridge, essentially a miniature flare. When the operator squeezed the ignition trigger, the mechanism rotated the cylinder and struck a fresh cartridge, sending a shower of sparks into the fuel stream. Each magazine held 5 cartridges, enough for 5 separate bursts of fire before reloading. This simple, rugged system meant the M2 could be counted on to fire every time, even in the dampest jungle or the thickest salt air. No more waiting for a battery to spark. No more hoping a circuit would hold. The constant pressure regulator inside the pack kept the nitrogen propellant steady, so each shot delivered the same reach and force from the first burst to the last. In testing, the new ignition worked flawlessly, igniting thickened gasoline with a single pull. For the first time, operators could trust their weapon to function under fire. The design was ready to leave the lab and head to production lines, promising a tool that would finally give assault teams a fighting chance against the bunkers ahead. 68 pounds strapped to the back, Two fuel tanks side by side, filled with a thick napalm gasoline blend. Between them, a narrow nitrogen canister, pressurized and ready to force liquid fire through rubber hoses. All of it connected to a metal wand, just over 3 feet long, with a pistol grip and a trigger that could unleash hell. This was the M2 Flamethrower, as the operator knew it, not as a blueprint, but as a burden. Every step forward pressed the harness into shoulders and spine. The tank sloshed with 4 gallons of fuel, enough for only 7 seconds of fire. In training yards and on Pacific beaches, operators learned that every burst had to count. The effective reach stretched from 20 to 40 meters, close enough to see the enemy's face, close enough for return fire to find the man behind the flame. The wand's nozzle hit a 5-shot ignition magazine, each cartridge ready to light the stream instantly. But the real weight was not just the steel and fuel. It was knowing that once the trigger was pulled, there was no hiding. The stream of fire could bend around corners, but the operator had to stand exposed, aiming carefully, counting off precious seconds as the tanks drained. When the fuel ran dry, the weapon became dead weight again, a heavy, empty promise, still strapped to a man's back. Assault squads carrying the new M2 Flamethrower moved into the shattered landscape of Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, where Japanese defenders had turned caves and bunkers into strongholds. The M2's stream of flame could reach deep into tunnels and pillboxes, flushing out entrenched soldiers that rifle fire and grenades could not touch. Marines advanced behind covering fire, crouched low as operators braced themselves, aimed, and released a torrent of napalm-thickened gasoline. In seconds, the oxygen inside a bunker vanished, and defenders were forced out or silenced where they stood. The ability to project fire around corners and through narrow openings changed the calculus of assault. On Iwo Jima, entire cave systems that had stalled battalions for days fell in hours once the M2 was brought forward. By late 1944, a standard Marine division had hundreds of these weapons on hand, up to 243 units integrated into their ranks, making flamethrowers a regular part of every major push against fortified positions. The M2's mechanical reliability turned the tide in places where nothing else could break the deadlock. Fear did not just live in the minds of those facing the flame. It haunted the men who carried the fuel tanks as well. Japanese defenders, confronted with the reality of liquid fire pouring into their bunkers, sometimes pulled the pins on their own grenades rather than face the flames. The terror of burning alive was so absolute that it could break even the most hardened resistance. But for every enemy who surrendered or died by their own hand, there was an American operator advancing into the open, weighed down with 70 pounds of flammable fuel, knowing that every enemy rifle was searching for him. The distinctive silhouette of the fuel tanks made these men priority targets. A single bullet could turn a flamethrower into a death sentence, igniting the fuel and consuming the operator and nearby comrades in an instant. Nearly 25,000 M2 flamethrowers rolled off production lines, each a calculated answer to the impossible positions of Pacific warfare. Yet as the war ended and the world counted the cost, the legacy of the flamethrower grew heavier. By the late 1970s, new weapons and changing values had pushed man-portable flamethrowers to the margins of military arsenals. International agreements like Protocol 3 of the United Nations Convention of 1980 place strict limits on incendiary weapons, recognizing a truth that soldiers had always known. Some tools of war leave scars that last long after the smoke has cleared. Flamethrowers like the M2 are now banned by most modern militaries, yet innovations born in desperation still echo through today's weapons. When technology breaks the boundaries of war, the ethical line moves with it. What we create for survival can define how history remembers us. Thank you for watching.